Previously on Action.
There is still feelings around the community.
But what do the younger generations think of sorcery-related violence?
Young people are saying enough is enough.
Accusing our family of this activity, and then the elementary old building was bent down.
It's very common when things go wrong that people start to ask, well, who is responsible?
Sometimes we won't have the courage to stand up.
Hi, I'm Hezron Wangi Jr. Thank you for joining me on Action. Action is a series that explores the complex problem of sorcery accusation-related violence in Papua New Guinea. This mainly involves the belief in sorcery, the violence that arises out of that belief, and the people involved.
And all that the women are asking is for a united voice from the government, the churches and the people to end violence in PNG.
So we're all standing in solidarity as Papua New Guineans coming together to fight the violence that's happening in the country.
Sometimes it takes a single, brutal, and inhumane act of violence to wake up an entire nation. In PNG, it happened in 2013 when the murder of Leniata Kapari in the streets of Mount Hagen stirred our community, especially women, to take action in what is now known as the National House Cry movement. What has followed will be the focus of our next episode of Action.
Coalition for Change was founded way back in 2008. It was a response to, there was a woman who had her baby cut out of her by her husband. And it was evident that there were a lot of stories coming in to the Post Courier about domestic violence. With all these stories, it became clear that no one was really doing anything about it. So we decided to put together an organisation that would look into what was missing here. Was it law, or was it what was the issue that stopped us right now from doing anything?
To better understand the barriers in the legal process of the period, we talked to Serena Sasingyan, a lawyer who was working at the time implementing the Family Protection Act with the Department of Justice and Attorney General.
So I remember a period in 2008 where there were a number of stories of very horrific cases of gender-based violence reported in the newspaper. And at that time, I recall there wasn't a lot of collective action on the ground to try and address the issue. But we began to hear of very influential women coming together, and these are women in very powerful places, some like Winifred Kamit, who was a partner at Gaydon's Lawyers at the time. You had women like Winifred Kiap, who was Chief of Staff at the Prime Minister's Office, PM and NEC. You had other very senior women all coming together and beginning to voice, I guess, their disgust at the lack of inaction government doing anything about these cases. And that was quite unique at the time because they began to mobilize together, and shortly after they created this organization called Coalition for Change.
At that time, I was working with the Business Council, so I used the network there where I basically just emailed out to all the members at that time and asked them to sign a petition. And so there was a lot of men and women that signed that petition, and which we got over 5,000 signatures in 2 days, mainly because of the network that we had. And they took that petition up to Parliament, where Dame Carol later presented that petition on the floor of Parliament.
The more we remain silent, the more these things will be perpetuated.
Unfortunately, blood had to be spilt for people to recognise the need for, and that's the constant challenge. Like, we've always had to have blood spilt. It's all the movements that we've done is an action to a reaction.
Unfortunately, has been generally accepted and internalized as a normal part of family life that you will have violence. And I think too, that was sort of some of the big changes and the shifts around that 2008 period where women started coming together and actually started saying, no, this is not right. In 2009, I was so inspired by what the women were doing. So it wasn't until a lot later where I began to understand that the specific gap that they were trying to address was really having a specific law against domestic violence, but then also trying to see what they could do to try help people easily access protection orders. Because if you are a woman that is experiencing violence in the home and you want to try and get your partner to stop, your husband to stop, it was very difficult to go to the courts at that time and to apply for like a restraining order.
For several years, the Coalition for Change rallied support for a Family Protection Act in PNG. But their opportunity finally came in 2013, when yet another source-related murder provided a platform for the bill to be fast-tracked in Parliament.
Fast forward to 2013, when we had the house cry, that brought things up again. Okay. We were able to sit there and go, we've been working on this, it's back there, can you help, and we used that time to be able to have people recognize it and sit back and say, okay, you've got this house cry, we've got this, while you're working on something to do with, with sorcery-related crimes, we've got something that's a little closer to home, okay, pardon the pun, but we've got the Family Protection Bill, and we want to push that through.
My name is William Kipongi. Currently, I'm working here at National Research Institute. Looking at the Family Protection Act itself, it is one of the laws that came into existence in 2013, passed as a law, and it was purposely created to address domestic violence, family-related issues, family conflicts, family problems, which has been very devastating in the communities. This cycle of violence within the family seems to be one of those most accepted violence that is deteriorating the family units, the community, and also as a bigger tribe or bigger group within the settings.
Looking at our culture of violence was perhaps one of the most important steps that we have taken as a nation in recent years. But has violence always been part of our society? We asked this question to Professor Miranda Forsyth from the Australian National University in Canberra.
I was involved in a case that involved a prosecution under the criminal code there of witchcraft. And I started wanting to find out more about that as a phenomenon that seemed to be having a lot of impact on people, a little bit in Vanuatu, and then, as I found out, a really significant amount in Papua New Guinea. The problem is that we don't have any clear baseline data where we can say, oh yeah, it was like this 10 years ago or 20 years ago. We can't tell that. What we can see is that there are trends of it rising and falling in different places across the country. So overall, it's certainly not getting any better. There are places where it didn't used to be a problem 10 years ago, where it is a problem today, unfortunately. On the positive side, though, I would say there is now a language to talk about the problem. So sorcery accusation-related violence in general, people now know what that means and are starting to identify it as a problem, just as gender-based violence is a problem. The government is certainly speaking out against it, and that's also significant. There are a number of different organisations that are actively working and networking with each other to address the problem, but they require support. So overall, where we've identified the right direction to head in, but now we really need to put a whole lot of resources behind that.
Gender-based violence has different forms, right? So you have intimate partner violence, you have child abuse, then you have this thing of sorcery-related violence as well that still kind of falls under that blanket GBV. But the thing about, I guess, sorcery-related violence is that we have to break the chain between the actual act and the belief. So I think when people start talking about it and they confuse the two, they're talking about the fact that they believe in witchcraft, they believe in sorcery. And but then a lot of the work over the last, since 2013 has been to try and break the link between the belief and the violence. You can believe in it. That's absolutely fine. No one's saying no for you to not believe in it. You can believe whatever you want to believe. You can believe the sky's pink, But that does not then mean that you have the right to then go and be violent towards another person.
So there's a lot of important implications within the Family Protection Act, but the implementation part is very low. It's very weak. Because not many of our other village court magistrates know about this IPO. What is lacking here is the information is still not reaching the village courts and other law enforcing agencies like Family Sexual Violence Unit. And when we were conducting training at Goroka, most of them seem to come to know these things for the first time.
Having a law against domestic or sorcery-related violence is, of course, not the only solution, especially in a country like PNG, where the institutions are often too distant from the man on the street to make a real difference. But what would it take for communities to come together and say no to gender violence once and for all?
There are a lot of people who are actively trying to prevent SAV from occurring. At the village level, at the local level, there are very dedicated human rights defenders, and that was a desire to bring together a whole lot of government agencies and NGOs to work together to solve the problem, because clearly you need to have a justice response, you need to have a health response, an education response, a church response. But the important thing to think about is that there are many different points at which we can have intervention. So we can think about right at the start, the community can have a plan in place, as some communities have done in Jiwaka province. And we're going to say in our bylaws that we're not going to have accusations of sorcery because we've seen the damage that they can do. Or, you can have groups, local groups, that once they hear that there are these kind of suspicions that are going around, then they will have leaders who will stand up and say, no, we're not going to go down this path. And so they will start to put out those sparks of the fire before they can really take hold.
I think ignorance is at the root of a lot of this. And I also feel like on both sides, when it comes to sorcery-related violence and also with family violence, a lot of it is the social change, rapid social change that we've been undergoing. To also know men that are also victims of violence that will not speak because otherwise they're just afraid of being seen as weak. So they sort of keep that abuse to themselves. But as someone that's also an advocate, I have seen overwhelmingly the numbers do show for themselves that women are, in majority of cases, the victims. So I think when you put that argument, you have to also be able to say that that's actually not really the norm. The cases are mainly that men are the perpetrators of violence.
Hi, my name is Zaria, and I'm part of the Clean Generation, a movement of young people all across Papua New Guinea who are taking a stand to build a nation that is strong and safe. And it is important for us to take a stand against sorcery accusation-related violence. You have seen people at the front line, heard their stories, and seen the impact of this violence. Young people are saying enough is enough, and that this violence has to end.
Coming up in the next episode of Action.
I am Sister Lorena from Switzerland. I'm a Franciscan sister of Divine Providence. And I came in 1979 to Papua New Guinea. Even after 40 years, people are still asking me that very question, what's your purpose? And all I say, to always bring the good out of situations, out of people, because I believe that God created each and every person for goodness.